America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. We got a great show for you all tonight. A Jersey boy.
That's right.
Come on. Hey, Tim, I'm going to introduce you in a moment as I say hi to everybody. Come on. Coming in. Lynette, hi, everybody. Come on in. Got something really interesting. We got a really interesting live tonight. This is a guy who I discovered a wee bit ago, and I just love the stuff that Tim Whitaker is putting out here on Substack. And I think he's going to be such an interesting listen tonight. And I'm going to say this a few times, everybody, as you come in. I want you following Tim and subscribing to him on Substack. Tim Whitaker, he's a former Christian fundamentalist, founder of the New Evangelicals. He is right now embarked upon, I think, one of the most important tasks in this country, helping to expose Christian nationalism and the threat it is to America. Tim, welcome, my friend. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me. Honestly, I followed your work for a long time. It's really an honor to be on your show and hang out with you and your audience. So thank you. It means a lot.
Well, you and I have a lot in common. I used to be a real political asshole, and then I woke up. You've always been awake. You've always been woke. But start with this way, Tim, as folks come on in and everybody press those red hearts. Everybody listening to us is going to learn some interesting shit tonight. I mean that. Tim, start us off like this, though. Give our audience, as they come in, just kind of a brief backgrounder on you, where you come from and what got you to right now.
Sure. Yeah. The nutshell version is I grew up deeply embedded in the white evangelical world, which really is animating so much of what's happening today. I was homeschooled for 9 years, went to a small private school after that. Grew up in a church that only had a piano for a long time. And then eventually they got a drum set. I became a drummer in the church, etc. But I'm someone, for your listeners who grew up in like the evangelical subculture that is there, I was baptized in those waters. I did missions work. I helped plant churches. I did drumming for a long time, almost 2 decades in the church. And I tell people that I was really radicalized by Jesus in these spaces. And it's something I'm still radicalized by today. The way of Jesus, loving your enemy, loving your neighbor as oneself. And it was precisely following Jesus that, long story short, led me out the door of my white evangelical institutions, trying to find a better path forward in my faith. And of course, like for many people out there who grew up similar to how I did, 2016 was a real wake-up call. I've had a lot of questions. But something is way wrong. And the story I tell people to kind of give your audience the setup is that I was taught very young that I was to be a virgin until I got married. That God had very strict sexual standards. And it was really bizarre to watch my Sunday school teachers who raised me on that on Facebook now tell me that because I wasn't voting for the guy on his third marriage who bragged about assaulting women on the cover of Playboy magazine, somehow I wasn't a true believer anymore. And that's when I knew something was really wrong. And that led me down a path to follow Jesus out the door of white evangelicalism.
Well, Tim, that's fascinating. Okay, so when did you kind of officially walk out that door of white evangelicalism?
Well, I was kicked out, really, because I started the New Evangelicals in December of 2020. I had so many questions. It was just an Instagram account. I did not mean for it to become what it is today. I just had a lot of questions. I was thinking, is anyone else out there concerned about the direction of my faith when it comes to COVID or how we respond to Black Lives Matter, Trump? And it turns out there was a lot of us. When I started the New Evangelicals on Instagram, I was still drumming in a more charismatic type church. I loved it. I was there every time the doors were open. I was a professional musician. And long story short, my pastor, who I think meant well still, just gave me an ultimatum. He said, I can't be on the stage drumming and saying what I'm saying online. I have to pick one. So I resigned from my position as a volunteer drummer. I walked out the door, never came back, and went down this journey.
in 16, did you feel a pressure to support Trump?
Definitely did, but I didn't. I voted third
Yeah.
party.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was very much tied to my faith. True Christians vote biblical values, right? That's a dog whistle for voting Republican. Of course, I had no idea even of my own heritage. I wasn't aware
Yeah.
of the moral majority. I wasn't aware of how all that started, right? I just thought Christians had these biblical views, and here we go. But Trump was the real wake up call of like, okay, I'm not sure this is biblical anymore, guys. Like I was on the path, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know. The guy who's posing for on the cover of Playboy, I was told that's like I should be nothing like that, as a
Yeah.
man. So what's
Yeah.
going on here?
Well, and Tim, it's fascinating because when I was in Congress and most of my political support through the years until I turned on Trump 7 years ago was always hardcore Christian evangelical. And I still engage with these folks, and the stuff they'll tell me about why they cling to this man. What do you hear from Christian evangelicals? Who do they acknowledge who he is personally, and they don't care because God's called them? What kind of stuff do you hear from these folks still?
Look, I really try and be measured when I talk about this because I don't want to come across hyperbolic. I grew up on talk radio, right? And so I don't want to sound like a Rush Limbaugh Sky is Falling
Yeah.
guy. But look, to me, just so your audience knows, I go to Christian nationalist events. I go to Turning Point America Fest every year. I've met Charlie Kirk. I've met the pastors behind the scenes. And I've asked them these questions in good faith because I'm not there to blow them up, right?
Yeah.
And look, here's the bottom line. In my experience, as someone who's deeply followed some of these movements, and they excuse it away. Trump's not perfect, but he's doing the will of God, perhaps. Or, if you're in the more charismatic circles, God has anointed Trump with the Cyrus anointing. If you're in the more dominionist Doug Wilson circles, Doug Wilson was recently popularized on CNN. This is God is using Trump as an instrument of righteousness to kind of cleanse the land and to make way for biblical values. There's always some kind of legitimizing narrative that they're able to employ by either pillaging a specific part of the Bible, usually not the red letters. It's usually somewhere in the Old Testament. It's almost always some random prophecy or some, what they might call is like a hermeneutic of sorts, an interpretation that gives them the justification for why, yeah, maybe Trump isn't great. But look, overall, he's voting, he's implementing biblical values. That's kind of how they get around it.
It's so interesting, Tim, because God, you and I have walked a parallel path. I helped Charlie Kirk get started. I helped Turning Point get started. Don't you throw your coffee at me, Tim.
I'm out of here.
Because again, and in the early days when he came to me and he had this vision for, I want to introduce free market and freedom and free trade and capitalism on college campuses. That's what I was all about. He and I had our breakup, and I left Turning Point once Trump won the first time, and I could see he was going and he was gone. And it did then seem, Tim, to become more of a religious fervor with guys like him.
Yes.
Whereas they didn't emphasize the religious prior to that. Does that make sense?
Yes. The person you need to know for that is Rob McCoy. Rob McCoy is largely seen, as far as I understand, to be Charlie's pastor. He was the one who really gave Charlie the ultimatum of like, hey, man, if you're a Christian, you guys are putting your faith, into the work that you're doing. And look, Charlie's a good example of what happens when you take some of these, what start out as like even moderate conservative ideals rooted in some of this far right stuff to its logical conclusion. Because Charlie started out way more libertarian. He was way more, I think, nuanced overall. And all of a sudden, you're like, "Whoa, dude!" Like this is a guy now who, and again, I've seen him do this. I do entire pieces on my YouTube account tracking this. He recites KKK Grand Wizard Great Replacement talking points now, and I'm like, "Whoa, what a jump!" You cannot underestimate the spiritual radicalization that is animating so much of the MAGA world. There is a sense of Christian fundamentalism, and I'm going to be very just broad, big picture here, because there's a lot of nuance. We could be here all day, but essentially, these folks believe that they have a special calling by God to take over the nation and to rule it from the top down. That's the ultimate assertion.
Stop. because I'm going to ask you to repeat that. And again, this is so important. Let me just interject real quickly here to our Substack live audience. Welcome, everybody. I'm talking to Tim Whitaker, a former Christian fundamentalist who now has made it his mission to expose the danger of Christian nationalism. And what I have found, Tim, is the Substack audience tends to be center left, blah, blah, blah. MAGA isn't necessarily here. We need to understand our fellow Americans. We need to understand where everybody's coming from. And that's why I so wanted to talk to you, Tim, because this is the base of Trump's support.
Yes.
And you can articulate it better than I can, but this base is growing so much more dangerous, I think, day by day. Repeat what you just said and then explain it. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, so there are Christians, I call them Christian fundamentalists, you can call them Christian nationalists, Christian supremacists, that believe that they have a calling by God to take over the nation and to rule from the top down. And whether it's Doug Wilson or it's Lance Wallnau, who popularized the Seven Mountain Mandate, there's a whole world of these folks who believe that they are doing the will of God. And when you have that kind of belief, everyone who opposes you is an enemy. You know, and this is, let me be clear. I like to be a nuanced person. I be pragmatic. I'm sure you and I, Joe, would find disagreements politically, but we want to work together. We want to make the compromises. So I'm not someone who's a hard line, like no compromise or bust. But we must understand that Christian nationalism does not want to compromise. Okay. Yes. They want to take over. This is not Mitt Romney conservatism, right? This is a whole other thing. This is not Adam Kinzinger. This is a whole different movement that believes that its enemies are demonically influenced, that they are enemies of God, and that these people are in God's army with a call to essentially eradicate, right, America from the evil, communist, Marxist, demonically influenced liberal elite. And they will stop at nothing to do that. And that's how you get this really hyper-partisan kind of attitude among your Charlie Kirks and your Trump, MAGA world. But I cannot emphasize enough, and I can unpack this more if you want. This is a spiritual war for many of these people.
And maybe this is impossible, Tim, but for Trump's MAGA base, what percentage of the MAGA base would you say is this hardcore Christian evangelical, or is that hard?
No, it's not that hard, actually. There's been a lot of good research on this. So PRRI, they are really the sociological data firm that tracks this stuff. Robbie Jones is the head of it. Great stuff, great author. And essentially, I can give you just the American demographic. They break up Christian nationalism into 4 quadrants. Christian nationalism adherents, these are your Charlie Kirks, or your hardcore, I'm all in. Then you have your Christian nationalist sympathizers. I agree maybe with like most of it, but maybe I'm not as convinced as Charlie. I won't storm the Capitol necessarily, but maybe I kind of get it, right? It's those kinds of people. Then you have your Christian nationalist skeptics. I'm skeptical. Then you have your full-on rejectors, okay? About 10% of the U.S. population are Christian nationalist adherents. Okay. About 15% are sympathizers. And the rest fall along rejector or skeptic. So the majority of Americans actually either are skeptical or reject Christian nationalism. And this is the key point, because we have to understand that Christian nationalism does not believe in democratic principles, meaning they don't care if they're a minority. They do not care about being a minority. They are funded by billionaires, and they're here to do real work. So it's important for us to realize that, that especially this 10%. Right? Which, by the way, is largely concentrated in white evangelicalism. About 65 to 70% of white evangelicals fall under Christian nationalism, and it does fall along political lines. So that you can look up all their research. They show you how it breaks out on all kinds of ways. And the data is troubling, to say the least. The last thing I'll say on this, and I'll hand it back over to you. PRI found that Christian nationalist adherents are more likely to endorse violence when they believe it's justified. Does January 6th ring a bell? Right? We can see this. And this is more than the so-called radical left and then their left-wing counterparts. It's concentrated in these Christian nationalist circles.
They want America to be a Christian nation, period.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that word Christian is doing a ton of heavy lifting, right? There are For example, MLK, right? He was a
Yeah.
devout Christian, a Black Christian liberationist, had amazing teachings. There's a whole white progressive social justice Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Christianity is not monolithic. This is a evangelical based, I would argue, fundamentalist position that essentially is going to take all of your culture war talking points and
Yeah.
squeeze it into why the Bible justifies these views, regardless if the Bible actually talks about them or not. Right? The Bible does not talk about abortion. The Bible does not talk about gay marriage. None of those things matter. But for the Christian nationalists, that's what it means to be a Christian nation. Those things are outlawed, etc.
And so, because again, I engage with these folks as well. So to achieve that goal, Tim, democracy be damned, the Constitution get out of the way. This is a
Yes.
higher calling.
Yes, and again, this is data. I'm not just making things up. The data shows that Christian nationalists, in their polling, largely reject multiculturalism. They reject democratic norms. They have no problem getting rid of the Constitution if need be, or rewriting parts of it. Remember, Trump on day one signed an executive order to end birthright citizenship. This is
Yeah.
from the party of the Constitution. I mean, I remember when Mark Levin used to give away free pocket constitutions. Okay, you're telling me this is the party of the Constitution? No. Why? Because it's not about that. These are all dog whistles to give them more power, more control.
Yeah, Timmy, I think that's so freaking smart. It's not about the Constitution. And I come from the Tea Party. And you and I, man, I don't know if you're a drinker, I'm a tequila guy. We could have a 10-hour conversation on the Tea Party because there was this split in the Tea Party. Mainly what animated us was the budgetary and the fiscal. Government's too big, the debt, we got to do something about the debt. But there was this other more nationalist cultural side that as soon as we went to Washington and didn't do anything, then that stuff started to take over. But I've been out. It's been fascinating, Tim. I've been out marching and doing rallies, big and small, around the country every weekend. And I'm seeing middle-aged, older white Americans who are part of the resistance to Trump waving the pocket constitutions and talking about freedom and democracy, everything the Tea Party was talking about 14 years ago. So things have totally flipped. But what you just said is so important. This animating force in the Republican Party does not care about the Constitution or democracy. That's so fucking important for people to understand.
That's right. It doesn't look. It doesn't care about small government. Trump is sending troops to cities. If this was Joe Biden or Harris, you're a talk radio guy. You know what they were talking about. This is Marxism. This is we have a 10% stake in Intel as a government now. You're telling me that's not the communism I was warned about? So what does that mean? It means that it's not about the values they claim. Everything is in service to two core things: power and control. Even the theology, it serves the logics of power and control. That's how this works. That's why I say Christian nationalists, there is no unified theology around these folks. They want to get power and control. They will work among a very large swath of Christians that would normally say that all of each other are heretics. You're a heretic, you're a heretic, but they'll put all that aside because they want the power and control that they believe they're due. And we have to be honest about one more thing. There is absolutely a white nationalist streak through all of this. That's why Dr. DeMar Tisby calls this white Christian nationalism. We can't forget that.
Really important. I want you to drill down on that. But to back up for a sec. So we're talking about the 10% of the American population, Christian nationalists, but they are the bulk of white evangelicals, correct?
Yeah, I mean, 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump in 2016, 2020, 2024, give or take. Yeah, I mean, and evangelicalism has been building networks for decades, right? Since the moral majority. So they have the networks, they have the funders, they're able to mobilize their base really easily. That's why I'm so picky about white evangelicalism, even though you can find Christian nationalism and Catholicism, etc.
Is Trump, for these folks, just a tool, a means to an end? And if and when he's gone in a few years, there's going to be somebody else. Is he just a tool for them?
Yeah, I think they're using each other. I think Trump is someone who's able to take advantage of people 100%. And I think the evangelical leaders don't mind being taken advantage of because Trump is giving them what they want, right? So I think it's
Okay.
like, look, we deep down, we both kind of get it, right? Like we're just taking advantage of each other here. But it's a great deal, right? I mean, we have Paulo White, who, if your audience doesn't know, is a charismatic prosperity gospel preacher who believes, just to give your audience who might not be part of this world a snippet, she believes that there are literal demonic strongholds on this earth and that she's anointed by God to break those demonic strongholds by warring in the spirit. This is called the New Apostolic Reformation. Okay, it's a whole thing. Matthew Taylor's work is really key here. She has her own office in the White House right now. She's able to bring her friends in to declare spiritual warfare, to sing worship songs that they see as conquering spiritual territory. This is happening now. So Paulo White, all those folks, they have no problem with Trump because he gives them what they want. They have access to power.
And obviously, Trump is not a believer in anything but Trump. And they
100%.
And Tim, most of them know that, right?
I believe so, 100%. Maybe if you believe that Trump is sincere, I think the leaders know that to get their base mobilized, they got to paint Trump as this person anointed by God or being used by God or being used as part of God's master plan. Therefore, touch not God's anointed, kind of vibe. I think that's more of the perspective for most people.
In your mind, the numbers, is this a growing population?
The last data I heard from Samuel Perry is that no, it's actually shrinking a little bit, which actually makes them more radical, right? Because they're losing their grip on power. But no, this is not a growing faction in a lot of ways. Charismatic Christianity is growing big time, but other parts of Christianity in America are really shrinking. So it's kind of a wash.
But is it fair to say, though, this minority has an absolute hold over my former political party?
Yes. Yes.
And in your mind, Tim, I don't like, again, you're more expert than I am. I'm a former Republican congressman. I don't see that hold abating at all. Do you?
No, definitely not. I mean, right, you think about how Mitt Romney was their last nominee. Mitt Romney. I miss Mitt. Bring me Mitt. I want Mitt back, I mean, isn't it crazy how the litmus test became, do you believe the election was stolen or not? That is wild. We are living in an upside down reality for these people. It's crazy.
It was, Tim, before Trump, you were either a rhino or you were a crazy conservative like me, but it was all based on the issues. That now it's just all based on devotion to Trump. It's got nothing
100%.
to do with the issues. But so now let's drill down on this issue because I think this is key. They want America to be a formal Christian country, nation. They want America to be a white Christian nation, don't they?
Yeah, so this can get a little bit tricky because, especially in charismatic circles, they are multi-ethnic in how they present, but the culture is whiteness, right? So you have to assimilate into this conservative, very white-based worldview about Black lives and about how the world works, right? So they might have representation. For example, at America Fest, there's certainly a lot of non-white people there, and they'll have Black speakers on the stage, right? But they're all assimilating into this whiteness is the idea, which is based ultimately on white supremacy. Again, we can't forget that our current sitting president got dinner with Nick Fuentes a few years ago, right? So, and we also know that neo-Nazi groups are on the rise and have been for quite some time. So certainly that sect is emboldened for sure, right? But they will accept people who are not like them if they'll assimilate into the culture that they're creating.
So I formally became a Democrat 2.5 months ago. How crazy is that?
Oh, boy.
What a journey, huh? Talk about a journey, Tim. You and I do need to get together.
We do.
And my new political party has their unique issues, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But to win, because I believe this is a genuine threat to democracy and the rule of law. America is not we are a secular nation. Thank God.
Yep.
But I worry because I think this movement and my former party are going to be tough to beat. Do you get a sense that, again, assuming Trump we can pry him out of the White House, that this group of people, this base, will coalesce around another Republican, J.D. Vance or somebody? Will there be unity, or post-Trump, could you see kind of a schism?
In the MAGA Republican world?
Yeah. In
Now,
the MAGA Republican world and in the Christian nationalist evangelical world.
one of their greatest strengths is that they really don't eat their own, and they will rally around people for the sake of the greater good in their mind, right? I mean, it's to a fault. Again, this is the party of family values, while they platform Matt Gaetz and Trump's Epstein files was no big deal. Like, are you kidding me? It's wild, right? But they don't care because
How do they, in your mind, Tim, how do they rationalize shit like that?
that is a question you have to ask them. It blows my mind. I mean, I'm sure you saw the tweet from Marjorie Taylor Greene praising Maxwell. I'm like, wait, you're telling me that you were concerned about drag queen story hour, and this is who you're propping up as like a good person? How do you not see it? So yeah, my brain still falls out of my head sometimes seeing this stuff. But look, I need to be, and I don't want to speak extreme, but I have sources for this. This is the Christian nationalist world. This is not out of a vacuum. Okay. This has been in the works for decades before the moral majority. Look up the name R.J. Rushdoony. Look up what he was writing about biblical law back in the 60s and 70s. They waited and pushed for decades to overturn Roe v. Wade, right? This for them is not just about one election. It's not about one president. There's a much longer play that they are committed to, and they have the money to commit to. So when Trump goes away, there will absolutely be someone else that will continue on their mantle 100%, in my opinion, which is scary because right now the Democratic Party has so much, infighting, but frankly, I understand why. I mean, I was at the DNC last year, and although, of course, I voted for Harris, I was not a fan of some of the things that I saw on that stage personally. I was like, oh, this feels a little too neocon for me, frankly. But if we can't get our act together over here, I just feel like we're really giving that MAGA world more of an opportunity to take more and more control, because they're able, between their right-wing media ecosphere, right, and their evangelical networks, they're able to disseminate information and talking points much more effectively than progressive media sources ever could.
This may be a weird question.
Okay.
These are believers in Jesus.
Yes.
I'm a Catholic kid, still a Catholic. I believe in Jesus. These are believers in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Do they wrestle with his teachings and what they are all about, or they make that fit somehow?
If you listen to Christian nationalist pastors preach, they rarely quote Jesus.
Boom, boom.
And there's a reason for that. There's no way to read the red letters and to advocate for the policies of this administration. How do you read the words of Jesus that says, welcome the refugee? Okay, that's the words of Jesus. And then say, I'm so glad we're deporting Kilmar Abreu Garcia. You can't square that. Okay, it's a direct contradiction. So there's a reason why they ignore love your enemy, because Christian nationalists don't believe in loving your enemy. They believe in crucifying their enemy, right? That's why and here's the thing, here's the nuance for your audience. It's really important. Christian nationalism is a Christian strain that has existed in Christianity. We have to be honest about this, okay? Christians have done bad stuff. However, Christian nationalism is antichrist in what it preaches. And there's a separation there, right? And so we have to be honest about this. These people do not follow the teachings of Jesus. They pillage the Bible for random Bible verses that they then twist into pretzels to fit their very distorted culture war ideology that leads to a world where there's less affordable healthcare, where there are more guns on the street, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That is nowhere in the Beatitudes. You can't swear that. I'm sorry. It's impossible. So, yeah, that's how I would say.
That, my brother, I think everybody, to have a good full day, everybody needs to laugh once during the day, cry once, and learn something new. What you just said just is so profound, and it's my what I've learned today. And I'm paraphrasing. These pastors, these Christian nationalist pastors, when you listen to them preach, they don't quote Jesus.
Yep.
That's powerful, Tim. That says so much.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And that's why I walked out. I am someone who has given my radical allegiance to the way of Jesus. I don't even pledge to the flag. I haven't in decades because my allegiance is to something else. Okay, that's a personal conviction of mine. So I've been this way my whole life because my tradition taught me this. My tradition led me in prayer to give my life to Jesus. So when my own tradition jettisoned that and they bowed the knee at the ring of power, right, in exchange for worldly power, and they said, this is Christian. I said, where? My allegiance to Jesus must supersede even what you guys are telling me. And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people like me who did the same thing, you know? Yeah.
Is there, Tim, is there a movement of people like you who have formally left and the new evangelicals? Is there a growing movement?
Yeah. So the organization I founded, the New Evangelicals, is a nonprofit organization, helping folks find a better path forward in their faith. But the real term is ex-evangelical. There was a whole ex-evangelical explosion online. Deconstruction was a thing. Many of my friends that I've met through this space went through that process. A lot of the scholars who track Christian nationalism kind of went through that as well. Yes, there are a lot of people who left the white evangelical church saying, where's Jesus? I can't find him here. I got to find him somewhere else.
And we want to make sure everybody listening to us understands. We keep talking about Christian nationalists and we talk about white evangelicals. Just so everybody's clear, are Christian nationalists a subset of white evangelicals?
They're broader than that.
Okay.
You can find Christian nationalists in Mormonism. You can find it in Catholicism. You can find it even in non-Christian sects. I would argue it's most concentrated in white evangelicalism.
And again, I would argue, correct me if I'm wrong, the vast majority of white evangelicals are either Christian nationalist or Christian adjacent. The second category you had, Christian nationalist adjacent or sympathizers, or is that right or no?
Yeah, I mean, the 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump in 2016, 2020, and 2024. So, I mean, I think it's safe to say that, again, white evangelicalism, Christian nationalism is most concentrated in white evangelicalism. Not every white evangelical. Russell Moore is a good example of a conservative evangelical Christian who rejects Christian nationalism, right? So certainly it's not every single person you meet. But rule of thumb, statistically, yes.
Do you see a day where there could be a movement of white evangelicals who rise up against the Christian nationalist?
The ones who do usually get kicked out of the movement, right? So, I mean, again, Russell Moore's a good example of that. He lost a lot. He lost a lot when he spoke up. So,
and as I was asking you that question, Tim, I was about to slap myself upside the head because politically, I've always been asked that question. Hey, Joe, is there a movement of you good traditional conservatives who will rise up against MAGA? Bullshit. We're excommunicated from the church.
Exactly.
From the party. The issue of immigration. Brown and black people being grabbed and detained and disappeared. They're all Christian nationalists, and generally, I think white evangelicals are full square behind all of this cruel bigotry out there.
Oh, definitely they're leaders. You know, I can't speak for every individual, right? But as far as the leadership in the influencers, Ali Sucky's behind this. She's all on board. Charlie Kirk is, Matt Walsh, they're all on board for this, 100%. Which is, what's ironic about this? I'll tell you a really funny thing really quick. And I'm sorry if my phone's kind of like glitchy. I'm not sure what's going on. I might try and move. I'm not sure how I look. But a funny thing. So a big thing about Christian nationalists is they're always afraid of Christian persecution. Joe Biden's going to he's going to throw us in prison. We're persecuted for our faith. Well, statistically, the immigrants that are targeted, most of them are Christians. They're either evangelicals or they're Catholics. Right? So the evangelicals who are behind these immigration raids are actually doing the very thing that they claim is happening to them. Think about that.
That's so true. No, that's so true.
It's crazy.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
That's how anti-intellectual, that's how disingenuous this movement is. Because again, it's not really about protecting Christians. It's about protecting them. White Christians who look and act and talk like them.
I swear, I forget what publication, a month ago, Tim, I read in some publication online that there's a community in Tennessee that where Christian nationalists, some of whom are tied to J.D. Vance, have basically bought a lot of property and they're moving people into this community to sort of have a pilot region within America that is sort of pretty much Christian nationalist. I'll get it. If you haven't heard of this, I'll get it to you. But have you heard of that at all?
I think I saw something loosely on maybe CNN covered it briefly. It was like,
Okay.
but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you can think about like the Redoubt movement in the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest. You know,
Yeah.
this is nothing new. It's just emboldened, right? So this stuff has always been there. What is scary about Trump is how it's being emboldened to become mainstream. Again, I go back to Doug Wilson. I've known about Doug Wilson for decades. He's been part of
Yeah.
the evangelical movement for years. Okay, this is a man who downplays slavery and everything.
Yeah.
I know that he wants to overturn that or erase the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. And I know that because I interviewed him 3 years ago on our podcast, trying to warn people. I also knew when Pete Hegseth was getting confirmed that this was Pete Hegseth's pastor. And what concerned me, Joe, is that not one person in Congress asked Pete Hegseth about his ties to Doug Wilson. And that's that's why people like myself and many others, I mean, scholars like Kristen Dumais and Matthew Taylor, Bradley Onishi, who track this stuff, we feel like we're screaming from the rooftops, please pay attention to who these folks are connected to. And for whatever reason, mainstream media, even progressive media, either doesn't have the eyes to see it or just ignores it. And then we do it all. Then we find out that CNN does a piece on Doug Wilson, which is great. I'm glad that they did, but it's kind of too late. Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense, guys.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. What is it, Tim? Why is it? I guess a two-part question. What is the real threat that you're really afraid of? Because it is a threat. But why is it so important for the rest of America to understand this topic that you've devoted yourself to exposing, Christian nationalism? Why is it so important for the rest of us to understand it?
Because, in my opinion, it is the greatest threat to American democracy. Period. It affects all of our neighbors. It affects our immigrant neighbor. It affects our neighbors who are women. It affects our queer neighbors. It affects all of our neighbors. It affects the middle class, the lower class. It is the biggest threat to the American democracy, as flawed as it is. It's the greatest threat to that project, in my opinion. And until you understand the zeal and the militancy that is animating this, you're not going to be able to fully combat it effectively. Can I give you one example, Joe, if that's okay? Do you mind?
Gosh, yeah, please. Tim.
So I was at America Fest, Charlie Kirk's thing in December. I go every year, and I saw on the bill that Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks was going to be there. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be crazy. I got to watch it. So I go into the main room and I watch the whole thing, and I come away and I go, oh my God. Like, Cenk doesn't understand that Charlie does not want to compromise with Cenk. He's not trying to find common ground. For Charlie, this is a message to his face of look who they conquered. And then I watched Cenk go all over the internet and be like, wow, look, we can find common ground. Now, again, I want to be clear to your audience. I want to find common ground wherever I can. These people believe that anyone left of them, which is saying something, is either demonically influenced or is the enemy and must be destroyed. Okay? And so until you understand that, you're never going to be able to fully counteract that. And I'm concerned that some politicians, even Gavin Newsom, who had Taylor Kirk on the show, again, like Gavin, you gotta hold his feet to the fire, man. You gotta hold his feet to the fire. Because, and by the way, after Charlie went on his show, I have Charlie's email list. I get his emails. Charlie billed it to his audience as, look, I made Newsom concede on every point. I'm like, exactly, Newsom. Charlie's not looking to work with you. That's what frustrates me the most.
Yeah, and that's a real important distinction you made, because I engage with MAGA every single day, and I have for years. The vast majority of whom I will no longer find common ground with, but I want total understanding of who they are and where they're coming from. Like there's a big difference there. That should be the goal of our audience tonight. Is we need to understand who these folks are, understand the threat they are. Even if we never find common ground with them, that may be
Right.
impossible, but you need to understand. So I think, as you said, Tim, maybe you didn't use the word defeat. We need to understand the MAGA movement so we can defeat it. I find myself saying that constantly.
We have to. And I don't say that lightly. I believe in loving my enemies. I'm
Yeah.
not someone who wants war. That's not who I am as a person. We have to realize that if we don't stand up politically to these folks and grow a backbone, we're going to be in even deeper trouble than we are. I mean, think about how fast Trump has done stuff
Yes.
in just 6 or 7 months, right? Think about how far we've come. What's his name? Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute on the
Yes.
first day, right? Like that's how far we've come in America. It's only going to get worse unless we understand the theology, the Christianity that is animating it. And if I may,
Yeah.
one last thought, and
Yeah.
I'll hand over to you. I've been saying this for a while. Here's why this is a perfect storm. Right-wing media
Yeah.
absolutely understands that they're speaking to a Christian audience who's largely Christian nationalists. So
Yeah.
they intertwine God and theology with their politics, right?
Yes.
But
Yep.
left-wing media has no such category for that, right? So left-wing media does a really good job, I think, of course, of being more factual and exposing the political side of this. But they don't have eyeballs or maybe an experience to understand the theology that is animating the right wing world, right? And so until the left-wing progressive media world, the mainstream media world, really get a grasp of what's animating the right-wing world, they're gonna miss it every time because there's something deeper than just politics. This isn't fascism. This is Christian fascism. Big
Yeah.
difference, you know. So we have to understand that in order to combat it effectively.
A really big difference, and so much overlap. And again, I do a lot of foreign media, and they always ask me, Joe, is fascism coming to America? I always say it's already here.
Yep.
What you're able to do, Tim, is show how Christian fascism animates so much of this. I want to ask you one more final question. I appreciate your time, by the way.
Of course.
Everybody listening to us right now, this guy, that handsome bearded mug right there, you all need to follow and subscribe here on Substack, Tim Whitaker.
Thank
Just
you.
amazing, amazing stuff that he puts out at Tim Whitaker Speaks. Follow him, subscribe to his Substack. You wrote a piece, or I read a post of yours that basically said, we should be angry, the need for holy anger. I love that title. Explain what you mean by that, my friend. The need for holy anger.
Sure. Well, as a Jesus follower, sometimes we get it confused that Jesus was always meek and mild, and certainly he was, especially to the outcasts and those most marginalized. But when it came to the religious powers of his day, he did not mince words. In fact, he
Yeah.
even commits, we could say, property violence, right? When he overturns tables in the temple, and
Yep.
he's angry at what he sees. I think that anger, if left unchecked, can lead to bitterness and do a lot of damage. It's like fire, right? But when it's harnessed correctly, that kind of outcry can lead us to really get involved in new ways and to really do something about it. And I think that we need to have that kind of holy anger of, it's not an anger that says we want to kill our enemies. It's an anger that it's almost mourning that our political enemies are so stuck in their dehumanizing ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That we are forced to do something to stop them from harming more and more people in hopes that they repent and turn and go the other way. Look, I don't believe in we live on the same planet as these folks. And I certainly don't believe in violence. I don't believe that we should do anything violent towards those people. They're made in the Imago Dei. My hope is that they repent one day. But as long as they don't, I have an obligation, and so do so do other Christians. They have an obligation to be very angry at the injustice that is happening to the people largely who are under the boot of empire. Right?
Yeah.
This is what Jesus preached. Liberate the oppressed. It's like Christianity 101. When we see our immigrant neighbor being unjustly deported, ripped of their due process. We see the human rights abuses that are happening in these concentration camps. We absolutely should use that anger and rage as motivation to do whatever we can to stop it, whether it's getting more involved in the political process, whether it's protesting, giving to organizations that represent these immigrants, et cetera. We have to be willing to engage in that.
You and I have very similar missions. I was one of those right-wing radio Fox News talkers who helped to inflame a lot of these folks. So the good Catholic boy I am, I'm on my mission to make up for that and to try to save them and convert them and get them out of this cult they're in. At the same time, knowing that I can't get most, and so I want to defeat the theology. But I do both. And I get a sense that you do both because, Tim, I've found as we close, I'm always able to convert a few every week or month who are able to wake up politically and realize how bad it is. So it's always possible, right?
Well, you and I are proof, right?
Oh, thank you.
You and I look at our life and go, look, for me, I'll be honest, this might be upsetting for some of your audience, and I'm sorry if it is. But I'll tell you something. I was not converted by being called a bigoted asshole online. Never worked. It was people who held space for me in my real life, who asked you questions I didn't have good answers to, that kind of just were curious. This is not, let's not get stuck in the binary. This is not either or. This is both and, right? There's a political level that we fight this at. Of course, we do everything in our power, right, to curb this authoritarian nightmare we find ourselves in. We educate people on the dangers of Christian nationalism and the billionaire class that's doing this. Yeah. But when it comes to our individual lives, the people that we know that no one else ever will, right? I'm sure maybe it's family that voted for Trump. Maybe it's friends. We have to find ways to hold space for those people because they're not going to change their mind by us, cutting them off in the name of well, I'm a better person than you. If I cut off close friends of mine or parents who voted for Trump, that would only reinforce how liberalism has destroyed their families, right? Or their friendships. So we got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And it's important that we do both.
Amen, my brother. Everybody listening, please make sure you're subscribed to both of us, Joe Walsh and Tim Whitaker. The real threat that is Christian nationalism, no one right now is doing a better job of exposing it than Tim Whitaker. Follow him, subscribe to him on Substack. My friend, thank you, brother. You and I'll stay in touch.
I would love to. Thanks so much for the time, Joe. It was really great.
You got it. Thanks, everybody. Be brave.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.